Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Now, before I get into the video, I've told you yesterday I've got another fantastic book offer for you. This is for the month of August 2023, U.S. orders only. Okay, since I've been dealing with the subject of the resurrection extensively, obviously so, in showing the connections between Daniel 12, Matthew 25, 1 Corinthians 15, Revelation 11, and Revelation 20. It's obviously all about revelation, or excuse me, resurrection, isn't it? So, for the month of August 2023, U.S. orders only, my book, The Resurrection of Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, fulfilled or future. Look, folks, this is one of the most in-depth analysis of Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, pardon me, that I think you're going to find. It's obviously on the resurrection, okay? My book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings. This has actually been called by some who, when they reviewed it, they were preterists. Now they're non-preterist. But nonetheless, when they were preterists, they said, this is the systematic theology of the full preterist movement. Now, obviously, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings, is based upon 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, which is a resurrection text. So, if you purchased both books, here we go. If you both purchased both books separately, okay, it would cost you well over $55 or $52, I think it is. But for the month of August 2023, U.S. orders only, your total delivered price, $45. Going to save you over $12. Okay? Go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com. There's a wonderful tab right up at the very top. Just click it, walk through it, order the books. You have a wealth of information here, folks. Extremely heavily documented. And listen, this particular book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, Dr. Andrew Perriman, a highly, highly respected scholar in the world today, says on the back of this book, okay, the question the New Testament writer spoke about the future of the people of God remains extremely vexatious and divisive, but we cannot deal with the problem simply by quarantining these rabid biblical texts and anyone who has come into contact them. In this well-argued and well-researched book, Don Preston shows that preterism is more than a sectarian reaction against dispensationalism. It has the potential, whatever we may make of the detailed conclusions, to contribute significantly to the broader renewal and reintegration of New Testament theology, unquote. Now, that's a highly, highly respected world-class scholar commenting on this book. Let me recommend again that you go to my website, that you order the two books, save yourself some $12, have a vast array of evidence and material at your disposal. And I can't tell you how many people have told me both of these books changed their lives. Okay, yesterday, we've been connecting the dots between the passages that we have adduced so far, Daniel chapter 12, Matthew chapter 25, Revelation, 1 Corinthians 15, Revelation 11, and now Revelation chapter 20. And let me say again, folks, you have to catch the power of this. If it can be shown that Revelation chapter 20, 10 and following, is speaking of the same time and event as of Daniel chapter 12, then it was fulfilled in AD 70. If it can be shown that Revelation 20 is the same as Matthew 25, 31 and following, then it was fulfilled in AD 70. If we can show that Revelation chapter 20 is the same resurrection as that in 1 Corinthians 15, but I mean, not only 1 Corinthians 15, but Revelation chapter 11, that means it was fulfilled in AD 70. I believe I can prove that Revelation chapter 20, 10 and following was fulfilled in AD 70 without connecting all of those dots, and we'll get to some of that. But by connecting all of these dots, we establish the overall unity of the eschatological narrative in the New Testament. We show that despite the dispensational concept of 5 separate and distinct resurrections, and yes, they do believe that many, and instead of dividing the book of Revelation into, chapters 1 through 19, AD 70, chapter 20, the end of the Christian age, 2,000 years and counting later. We've shown the absolute perfect unity and harmony of the biblical narrative. Now, yesterday I began connecting the dots between Daniel chapter 12 and Revelation chapter 20, bringing in Revelation chapter 11 a little bit. And again, we'll get more to that. But let me conclude the connecting of the dots in Daniel chapter 12, because I had to kind of leave it off due to time constraints yesterday. Daniel chapter 12, the Great Tribulation. Revelation 7, the Great Tribulation. Now, and let me reiterate a point here. Revelation chapter 7, the 144,000 come out of the Great Tribulation. That means they lived during the time of the Great Tribulation. That doesn't mean they were the subject of the Great Tribulation, by the way. It simply means they lived through it, and they came out of it. Who are the 144,000? Well, to reiterate, they're the first fruits to be redeemed from man by God. That means they're the first generation of Christians, Jewish Christians specifically, and that's Revelation chapter 14, 2 and following. So Daniel chapter 12, the Great Tribulation, Revelation 7 and 14, the Great Tribulation, that had to have happened in the first century. But this 144,000, ladies and gentlemen, would be led to rivers of living waters. That's Revelation chapter 20 and 21 and 22. That's the first century saints. Now listen, if it's true, and it is, that the 144,000 are the first century saints, and they were going to inherit and enter into this new creation, which follows the judgment and the resurrection of chapter 20. But if that first generation was going to enter into that new creation and the rivers of living water, then that means Revelation 20 had to be fulfilled in the first century. Sorry, there's no way out of that. I'm sorry, they're just not. So Daniel chapter 12, in predicting the Great Tribulation, and Revelation 7 and 14, positing the Great Tribulation for the first century, demands a first century fulfillment of the resurrection that leads to entering into the new creation. So Daniel chapter 12's prediction of the resurrection of the just and the unjust to everlasting life or everlasting condemnation is in fact Revelation chapter 20, 10 and following. Now, lest I reiterate too much here, remember, and this is where I left off yesterday, in Daniel chapter 12, verse 6 and following, one angel asked another, when shall these things be? What things? What's the antecedent of these things? Well, it's great tribulation, resurrection, the righteous shining forth in the kingdom, entrance into the kingdom, the time of the end. When shall these things be? And the other angel lifts his right hand and left hand and swears by him who lives forever and ever, it shall be for a time, times and a half time, And when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all of these things shall be fulfilled. Now look, yes, I know that all doesn't always mean all. But you've got to be able to prove from context where this use of all doesn't mean all. You cannot just arbitrarily say, oh, well, Preston, all doesn't always mean all, and everybody knows that, and just leave it there. Prove that all in Daniel chapter 12, verse 7 doesn't mean all of these things, and you've got to prove that the antecedent reference to these things is not to all of the things that Daniel was told about. You just, making claims is just like throwing words in the wind unless you have definitive proof. So here is, for brevity's sake, here's the resurrection of the just and the unjust. Revelation chapter 20, the resurrection of the unjust, eternal condemnation. Entrance into the most holy place, i.e. the presence of God, the tabernacle of God is with man, and entrance entrance into the new creation, that's for the righteous. That's Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. What was that? The angel's answer to when all of these things would be fulfilled? When the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all of these things shall be fulfilled. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if it is true that the resurrection of Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, is the same resurrection as Revelation chapter 20, 10 and following, then it must be true that the resurrection of Revelation chapter 20, 10 and following was to be and was fulfilled when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered. And lately, when I've cited Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, and I'll close on this, some people have jumped up and they say, well, yeah, but I found a couple of translations here, a grand total of 7 out of over 50, that say when the power of the one who shatters the holy people has been shattered, all these things will be fulfilled. Well, as many, many, many Hebraists have noted, in order to get that, you have to change the wording of the Hebrew text. Some commentators say that's fraud. That's just illegitimate. But at the very least, it is grasping at straws. It is trying to avoid the power of the text, which posits the resurrection at the time when the let me use the word that some people want to use. The scattering of the holy people is completed. It's brought to its end because it's completed. Thus, it's the destruction of the power of the holy people. Now, ask yourself the question, ladies and gentlemen, when was the power of Old Covenant Israel completely shattered? Just last week, as I filmed this video, one individual jumped up and said I was just completely false. I presented the syllogisms to sustain my view, and he said, well, your syllogisms are correct, but your point is invalid. Really? Listen, folks, if you're going to accept Daniel chapter 12, verse 7, in the great, vast majority of translational presentations, then you can't just arbitrarily jump out there and say, well, your argument is false, Preston. You have to prove that Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 is a different resurrection from that of Revelation chapter 20. So, if it is true that Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, is the same resurrection as Revelation chapter 20, 10 and following, and if it is true that the resurrection of Daniel 2 would be fulfilled when the power of the holy people was completely shattered. And by the way, when I asked this one objector, who was Daniel's holy people, when was that power completely shattered, he refused to answer. So, if it is true that Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 would be fulfilled when the power of the holy people is completely shattered, then it must be true that Revelation chapter 20, 10 and following was to be fulfilled, and was, when the power of the holy people was completely shattered. Guess what? That agrees perfectly with the entire narrative of Revelation, which we will get to. Okay? So, tomorrow, we will look at more connections of more dots. Okay? We're going to leave Matthew chapter 25, 31 out because we don't have quite the explicit statements there that we do in Daniel 12 and 1 Corinthians 15, but we'll tie those knots together nonetheless. Okay? I will see you on the flip side.